Europe today is not just in trouble, it is under strain on multiple fronts, and the pressures are compounding. The reality is stark: mass immigration is reshaping societies at a pace most governments cannot manage, and for many citizens, the possibility of reversing the trajectory is fast slipping away. Across cities and towns, public services are stretched to breaking point. Schools struggle with overcrowded classrooms. Healthcare systems groan under demand. Housing is in crisis. Yet these are only the surface symptoms of a deeper, structural challenge that threatens the foundations of European civilization. For a growing number of Europeans, the fear is not merely economic or logistical, it is cultural. Many see the gradual Islamization of parts of Europe, whether fully realized or in progress, as a reality within the next decade or two. This is not alarmist rhetoric. Studies, reporting, and public debates repeatedly document areas where integration has failed or stagnated, where communities live in parallel societies, and where radical ideologies have gained footholds. Governments often downplay these issues or insist that the problems are exaggerated. But on the ground, citizens experience them daily, and frustration is mounting. At the same time, Europe is grappling with economic stagnation and rising public debt. Growth remains sluggish in most countries, limiting the ability of states to respond to the increasing pressures caused by migration and demographic decline. Welfare systems, once the hallmark of European stability, are under severe strain. With fewer workers supporting more retirees, pensions and social services face growing unsustainability. Demographics deepen the crisis further. Most European nations have low birth rates and populations that are aging rapidly. Life expectancy rises, yes, but so does the economic burden on younger generations, exacerbating social tension and widening generational divides. Voters are responding to this crisis. Election after election across Europe shows the same message: citizens want a different route, a break from policies that appear increasingly disconnected from reality. Yet many perceive that political elites retain the ability to limit meaningful change, especially on issues like mass immigration, through bureaucratic control, legal frameworks, and coalition politics. That disconnect fuels discontent, making people feel that their voices are ignored while societal pressures mount. And alongside these pressures, a cultural and ideological shift is occurring. Europeans are returning to conservative values, emphasizing national identity, tradition, social cohesion, and the rule of law. There is a renewed insistence that societies must be protected, borders defended, and legal norms upheld. Conservatives are emerging as defenders of freedom of speech and individual liberties, challenging attempts by mainstream institutions and media to silence dissenting opinions. Meanwhile, liberal and woke frameworks are increasingly viewed as intolerant and rigid. Many citizens see these modern trends not just as misguided, but as actively harmful, stifling debate, enforcing moral conformity, and undermining the freedoms that European societies were built on. This tension is now the defining political and social narrative across the continent. On one side, rising conservative movements are demanding practical, culturally grounded policies. On the other, liberal institutions and mainstream media continue to push ideological narratives that are out of step with the lived experiences of ordinary citizens. The result is polarization, frustration, and a Europe-wide debate about identity, sovereignty, and the very nature of freedom itself. Europe's challenges are real, interconnected, and accelerating. Citizens feel the strain economically, culturally, and politically. Mass immigration, demographic decline, rising debt, and overextended welfare systems form a perfect storm. The public is no longer willing to wait for elites to catch up. And with conservative values resurging as the voice of freedom and common sense, Europe is entering a pivotal moment that will define the continent for decades to come. If the first reality is pressure, the next is direction, or more accurately, the absence of it. Because despite everything that is happening across Europe, there is still no clear or decisive response from those in power. What people see instead is hesitation, delay, and in many cases, a refusal to fundamentally change course. Governments across the continent are still operating within frameworks designed for a different time, when populations were stable, economies were stronger, and migration was manageable. That world no longer exists. Yet policy responses often feel disconnected from present realities. Immigration continues at scale, while integration systems struggle to cope. Economic growth remains weak, even as debt rises. Welfare systems expand in cost, despite clear warnings about long-term sustainability. For many citizens, the conclusion is simple: the system is not adapting. And when systems fail to adapt, frustration builds. People vote, they send a message, and yet the outcomes rarely match the expectation. Across Europe, election results show a clear demand for change: stronger borders, stricter immigration control, and policies that prioritize national stability. But once those votes enter the political system, they are often diluted. Coalition politics, legal frameworks, and institutional resistance slow everything down. This creates a growing perception that political elites still have enough control to manage outcomes, even when voters signal something very different. Whether that perception is entirely accurate or not is almost beside the point. What matters is that it is widely believed. And belief shapes reality. The result is a widening gap between the public and those in power. Trust erodes. Institutions lose credibility. And the sense grows that the system is protecting itself rather than responding to the people it is meant to serve. At the same time, the cultural divide continues to deepen. What was once a disagreement over policy has become something more fundamental: a clash of worldviews. On one side, there are those who continue to support liberal and progressive frameworks, emphasizing openness, diversity, and global integration. On the other, a growing number of Europeans are rejecting those ideas outright. For many, this rejection is not mild or uncertain. It is strong, and in some cases, absolute. There is a widespread belief that modern liberal and woke ideologies have moved beyond balance, becoming rigid, intolerant, and disconnected from reality. Instead of promoting freedom, they are seen as limiting it, policing speech, narrowing acceptable opinion, and discouraging open debate. This is where the narrative begins to turn sharply. Because increasingly, conservatives are not just positioning themselves as an alternative, they are positioning themselves as defenders of fundamental freedoms. Freedom of speech, in particular, has become a central issue. Many argue that it is conservative movements that are now pushing back against censorship, defending open discussion, and resisting what they see as enforced conformity. Meanwhile, liberal institutions and media are often perceived as doing the opposite, labeling dissent, restricting debate, and framing opposition as unacceptable rather than engaging with it. This has led to a reversal in perception. Where conservatism was once widely portrayed as restrictive, it is now, in the eyes of many, the side arguing for open discourse. That shift is powerful, and it is reshaping political identity across Europe. What emerges from all of this is not just political disagreement, but a deeper loss of alignment between society and leadership. The challenges Europe faces are real and growing, but the response remains fragmented and contested. And as long as that gap persists, the pressure will continue to build. What all of this ultimately leads to is a continent at a crossroads, where the pressures are no longer building quietly in the background but are now shaping the direction of Europe's future in real time. The combination of mass immigration, economic strain, rising debt, and demographic decline is not temporary. It is structural, and it is accelerating. For many Europeans, the sense is that time is running out. The idea that current trends can simply be managed or gradually corrected is losing credibility. Instead, there is a growing belief that the window for meaningful change is narrowing, and that without decisive action, the transformation of European societies will become permanent. This is where the concept of irreversibility enters the discussion. Increasingly, people are asking whether the scale of migration and the pace of cultural change have already passed a point where they can be reversed. The concern is not only about numbers, but about long-term trajectory. For those who hold this view, the possibility that Europe could look fundamentally different within the next decade or two is no longer hypothetical, it is expected. In that context, the question of Islamization becomes central for many. Not as a slogan, but as a perceived outcome of current trends. Again, this is not a uniform or uncontested view, but it is one that is gaining traction across multiple societies. It reflects a deeper concern about whether European legal systems, cultural norms, and institutional frameworks can remain intact under sustained pressure. At the same time, the economic and demographic realities continue to tighten the situation. Low birth rates mean fewer future workers. Aging populations mean higher costs. Rising debt limits government flexibility. Welfare systems, already under strain, face increasing demands. These are not ideological problems, they are mathematical ones. And they do not resolve themselves through rhetoric. So the pressure builds on every level: economic, cultural, political. And this is where the shift toward conservative values becomes not just visible, but decisive. More and more people are turning toward ideas that emphasize stability, continuity, and control. Borders, identity, sovereignty, law, and order, these are no longer fringe concerns. They are becoming central to how large parts of the population think about the future. At the same time, the rejection of modern liberal frameworks continues to intensify. For many, these ideas are no longer seen as progressive or beneficial, but as disconnected and, in some cases, damaging. There is a growing willingness to say this openly. What was once considered controversial is now part of everyday conversation. Crucially, this shift is also redefining the debate around freedom. Conservatives are increasingly seen by their supporters as the ones defending open speech, resisting censorship, and pushing back against what they view as ideological enforcement. In contrast, liberal institutions are often perceived as limiting debate and narrowing acceptable viewpoints. Whether fully accurate or not, this perception is widespread, and it is shaping political momentum. The result is a Europe that feels divided, uncertain, and under pressure, but also one that is actively redefining itself. Voters are no longer passive. They are engaged, frustrated, and increasingly determined to influence the direction of their societies. The political system, however, still moves slowly. Institutions resist rapid change. Policies shift incrementally, even when public demand is urgent. And that creates tension between speed and resistance, between expectation and reality. That tension cannot remain unresolved indefinitely. Because the underlying issues are not going away. Immigration continues. Economic pressures persist. Demographic decline deepens. And public sentiment continues to shift. So the question facing Europe is no longer whether change is coming. It is whether that change will happen through controlled adjustment, or through mounting pressure that eventually forces a more dramatic break. Thank you for watching. Please engage in debate in the comment section and remember to like, subscribe and share. We would appreciate further support. Please buy us a coffee. Link in the page bio.